A wounded Navy SEAL stopped to help a starving old man on a snowy night. But that simple act of kindness would ignite a war he never saw coming. Behind that old man's eyes was a secret buried in fire, corruption, and a company willing to kill to keep it hidden. With only his K9 by his side, the SEAL would uncover a truth that could destroy everything or save a soul long forgotten by the world. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. Snow drifted quietly over the small mountain town of Flagstaff, Arizona, blanketing the dark streets in a silence that felt both sacred and lonely. The lamps along the park's path flickered weakly, their light dissolving into the curtain of snow. Jack Turner sat on a worn wooden bench near the frozen fountain, his breath rising like faint smoke. The young Navy SEAL had come here to heal, physically and otherwise. His right arm was still wrapped tightly in gauze from a gunshot wound sustained during his last mission overseas. Officially, he was on leave to recover. Unofficially, he was running. From the noise, from the faces, from the weight of memory that followed him wherever he went. Ranger, his loyal German shepherd, lay at his feet, head resting on his paws. The dog had served beside Jack through the worst of it: ambushes, explosions, nights when neither thought they'd see dawn. Now, even in this quiet town, Ranger's eyes remained sharp, scanning the stillness as if danger could bloom from snow. Jack broke the silence first. "We're not soldiers here," he murmured, rubbing the back of the dog's neck. "Just ghosts waiting for morning." Ranger gave a soft huff, something between a sigh and understanding. He had chosen Flagstaff because it felt forgotten, like him. The cold didn't bother him anymore. Pain had its own temperature, and his body had long learned to adapt. But that night, as he unwrapped a simple burger he'd bought from the all-night diner on Route 66, something inside him felt different. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the way the snow erased everything ugly for a while. Then he heard it, a voice, cracked and tired. "Sir, could I have a sip of water?" Jack turned. Standing a few steps away was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, wrapped in a torn military coat that had once been olive green. His eyes were pale, glassy, filled with something deeper than hunger, something like shame. Jack handed him his bottle without thinking. "Keep it," he said. The man hesitated, then took it with trembling hands. "Haven't had clean water since yesterday," he muttered. His voice was low but carried the tone of someone who used to speak with authority. "You a soldier?" Jack asked quietly. "Used to be," the man replied, his lips cracking into a faint, almost bitter smile. "Name's Franklin Moore. I fought more wars than I can remember and lost more than I care to count." Something in that voice stirred Jack's curiosity. He motioned toward the bench. "Sit." Franklin did, slowly, as if every joint in his body had its own memory of battle. Jack stood, went to the corner store across the street, and returned minutes later with a bag full of food: sandwiches, bottled water, a thermos of coffee, and 2 chocolate bars. "You planning to feed an army?" Franklin asked, half in disbelief. "Just a hungry man," Jack replied. The old veteran ate carefully, as though afraid it might be taken away. For a long time, neither spoke. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. Then, almost abruptly, Franklin began to talk. He told Jack about his son, a boy once full of light who had fallen into the wrong crowd. Drugs, debts, bad company. "He thought he could gamble his pain away," Franklin said, voice shaking. When he overdosed, I thought the nightmare was over, but the men he owed money to came after me instead. His hands clenched around the coffee cup. They burned my house, everything. I went to the police, but they said there wasn't enough evidence, said I should move on. So I did, right into the street. Jack listened in silence. Each word was like a mirror held to his own reflection. He remembered the night his best friend in the unit, Lewis, had taken a bullet meant for him. The guilt still burned like shrapnel inside his chest. "You didn't deserve that," Jack said finally. "No one does." Franklin shrugged. "Life doesn't care what we deserve, son, only what we endure." For the first time in months, Jack felt something break inside, not the pain of his wound, but the ache of recognition. He saw in Franklin the same quiet ruin he saw in himself, a man who had served, lost everything, and kept breathing out of stubborn habit. "Where do you sleep?" Jack asked. "Old bus stop off the highway," Franklin said. "Roof leaks, but the snow stays out if I'm lucky." Ranger lifted his head then, as if understanding the conversation. The dog moved closer to Franklin, pressing his muzzle against the man's knee. Franklin froze, then smiled faintly. "He's got a good heart," he whispered. "Most men don't anymore." Jack nodded slowly. "Neither do most dogs," he said. "But he's different. We both are." The clock from the church across town struck midnight. Franklin's breath came out in small white clouds. "You ever wonder if we were meant to make it this far?" he asked. Jack stared into the distance where the park lights dimmed into fog. "Every damn day," he said. "But if we're still breathing, maybe that means there's something left to do." They sat in silence again. Snow gathered around their boots. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried out, a sound both wild and mournful. Franklin finished his coffee, placed the empty cup beside him, and whispered, "You're a good man, Jack. Don't lose that. The world needs a few left." Jack didn't answer. He just looked at Ranger, who was watching the old man with the steady patience only a soldier's companion could have. Inside, Jack's mind raced. The same rage that once drove him through enemy fire now turned toward the nameless faces who had destroyed this man's life. There was no command, no orders, just a growing conviction that he couldn't walk away. Not this time. His pulse quickened, his wounded arm throbbed, but the pain only sharpened his focus. Somewhere deep inside, something that had been sleeping in him stirred awake. He didn't yet know that this quiet meeting, under the falling snow of Flagstaff, would pull him back into a battle he never expected, a battle not for country, but for justice. As Franklin stood to leave, Jack reached into his pocket and handed him a folded bill. "Get yourself somewhere warm tonight." Franklin hesitated, then accepted it, his voice soft. "God bless you, son." Jack nodded, but said nothing. When the old man disappeared into the snow, Jack remained on the bench. Ranger rested his head against Jack's leg, watching the same direction Franklin had gone. "We're not done," Jack whispered. "Not yet." Ranger's tail flicked once against the snow, as if he understood. Above them, the snowfall thickened, swallowing the park in silence. And in that silence, Jack Turner, wounded soldier and reluctant savior, made a promise he would soon have to keep. Morning crept over Flagstaff with a thin light that turned the snow into glass. The air was sharp, biting at the lungs, and the quiet forest beyond the town looked untouched, as if time itself had chosen to pause there. Jack Turner parked his old pickup at the edge of a clearing where the charred skeleton of a cabin still stood, a black scar on the whiteness. Beside him, Ranger leapt down from the truck bed, sniffing the cold air, ears alert. In the passenger seat, an old coat lay folded carefully, Franklin Moore's. Jack had found him that morning at the same park bench, sipping coffee from a paper cup Jack had brought. "You sure you want to see it?" Jack had asked. Franklin had nodded without hesitation. "I've seen worse." But when they arrived at the clearing, the old man's silence said more than words could. The cabin was nothing more than burnt beams jutting from snow like bones. The smell of ash lingered faintly even after years. Franklin knelt, brushing snow off a half-buried brick. "She planted flowers right here," he murmured. "Lilies. Said they'd bring color to a place even winter couldn't touch." His voice cracked. Jack felt the ache behind those words, the kind of pain that didn't heal with time, only dulled until someone reopened it. "We'll rebuild it," Jack said simply. "I can help." Franklin looked up, eyes narrowing as if weighing the offer. "You've got better things to do, soldier." "Not today," Jack replied, "and not until this place stands again." By noon, they had cleared much of the debris. Jack's wounded arm throbbed, but he ignored it. He had spent years tearing things down in war. Now, for once, he wanted to build. Ranger helped in his own way, dragging bits of broken wood, staying close whenever Franklin's steps faltered. There was something protective in the dog's movements, as if he sensed that the old man's soul was more fragile than his body. When the sun began to lower, the sound of an engine broke the peace. A black SUV rolled up the dirt road, stopping a few yards away. Two men stepped out. The first was tall and lean, maybe in his 40s, with the rigid posture of someone used to giving orders. His name was Rick Dalton, a local contractor, though everyone in town knew he did side work for whoever paid well. The second, shorter and heavier, wore a smirk that didn't belong in the cold. Cal Wesson, his partner, a man with a temper as short as his fuse. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Rick said, hands shoved casually into his coat pockets. "Nice day for charity work?" Jack straightened, eyes narrowing. "You lost?" "Not exactly," Rick replied. "See, this land, well, it's under contract with Griffin Industries now. Company's planning to clear the area for storage tanks. You two are trespassing." Franklin froze, his face draining of color. "You're lying," he said hoarsely. "This is my land. Always was." Rick smiled, faintly. "Was, old-timer. Guess you didn't read the papers after your little accident." Jack took a slow step forward, voice calm, but edged with steel. "We're rebuilding a home, not starting a fight." Cal snorted. "Could have fooled me, soldier boy. Thought you people only knew how to destroy." Ranger growled low, the sound deep and deliberate. Cal's grin faltered. "Call your mud off." Jack didn't move. "He decides who's a threat." Rick's expression hardened. "Here's the deal. You pack up and leave before sundown, or we'll make sure you do." He turned, signaling to leave, but not before muttering, "Next time, it won't be words." The SUV's tires kicked up snow as it sped away, leaving behind a silence so sharp it hurt. Franklin's hand shook as he picked up a piece of charred timber. "They'll come back," he whispered. "They always do." Jack exhaled slowly, watching the road vanish into the trees. "Then we'll be ready." That night, they worked under lantern light, reinforcing what little structure remained. The air was bitter, but the fire Jack built kept the shadows at bay. Franklin spoke little, though once, when the wind died down, he said softly, I used to believe the law protected good men. Turns out it just protects the rich ones." Jack didn't answer, but he knew the truth of it. He had seen men die for causes no one remembered, orders no one questioned. He wasn't sure which hurt more, losing faith in the system or realizing it had never cared for men like them. Ranger sat near the edge of the clearing, ears twitching. The dog had been uneasy since sunset, his instincts sharp from years of battle beside Jack. Every creak in the woods made him lift his head. When Franklin went to rest in the truck, Jack stayed outside, eyes scanning the tree line. He wasn't a man easily shaken, but something about the silence felt wrong, like the moment before a storm. He thought of Rick's threat, of the company's reach, of how easily people vanished when they stood in the way of profit. Just past midnight, Ranger stiffened, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Jack rose instantly. From the shadows beyond the pines came the faint crunch of footsteps, slow and deliberate. Then another. "Ranger," Jack whispered, his voice barely above the wind. The dog crouched low, ready. The crunching stopped. For a long heartbeat, there was only silence. Then a voice, familiar, mocking, called out from the dark. "You should have listened, soldier." A flare of light exploded across the clearing as a bottle burst into flame near the half-built wall. Jack dove forward, smothering it with his coat as another bottle arced through the air. The fire caught on the old wood, spreading fast. Ranger lunged toward the tree line, barking furiously. Jack caught a glimpse of figures retreating into the dark. The glint of metal, a flash of a grin. Franklin stumbled out of the truck, coughing. "What? What's happening?" "Get back!" Jack shouted, throwing snow over the flames. The small fire died, leaving a smoking crater in the snow. He stood there for a moment, chest heaving, watching the forest swallow the attacker's laughter. The air smelled of gasoline. Franklin sank to his knees. "They'll kill us," he whispered. "They already tried," Jack replied quietly, "and failed." He looked toward Ranger, who stood at the edge of the trees, tail stiff, gaze fixed on the darkness. "We're not running," Jack said, his voice steady. "Not this time." The wind rose again, scattering ash into the cold night. Somewhere deep in the woods an engine started, then faded into silence. Jack holstered the pistol he hadn't used and turned to Franklin. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we find out who sent them." The old man nodded weakly, climbing back into the truck. Ranger returned to Jack's side, his body tense but unshaken. Together they stared into the black forest, knowing this was only the beginning. Above them, the moon slipped behind clouds, and the night seemed to close in like a warning. The wind had changed over Flagstaff, bringing with it a brittle cold that sliced through the forest like glass. 2 days had passed since the fire attack, and the air around the ruined clearing still smelled faintly of smoke. Jack Turner stood where the flames had scorched the snow, his eyes scanning the dark tree line as if the night itself might whisper the names of the men who did it. Ranger sat beside him, silent and still, the kind of stillness that came from discipline rather than calm. Neither of them had slept much. Franklin Moore was gone. He had left early that morning to fetch supplies from town and never returned. When dusk fell and the road remained empty, Jack's instincts kicked in, old habits from the battlefield resurfacing, sharp and immediate. Something was wrong. The attack hadn't been meant just to scare them. It had been a message, a promise of what would come next. Jack packed only essentials, his pistol, a flashlight, and the small military knife he'd carried since deployment. Ranger followed close as they drove down the frozen back roads toward town. The streets of Flagstaff were quiet. Most shops shuttered early against the cold. But one light still burned, a corner diner near the station. Jack stepped inside, the bell above the door ringing softly. The warmth hit him like a memory of another life. Behind the counter, a woman looked up from wiping a table. Her name was Sarah Denton, the diner's owner and one of the few people in town who hadn't been bought or scared into silence. She was in her late 30s, with eyes that carried the weariness of someone who had seen too many promises broken. Years ago, her brother, a firefighter, had died in an accidental blaze at a Griffin construction site. The investigation had gone nowhere, and since then she had learned to recognize the smell of corruption long before it arrived. "Evening, soldier," she said softly, recognizing Jack. "You look like you've seen ghosts." Jack gave a faint, humorless smile. "Maybe I have." He told her what happened, the threats, the fire, the missing old man. Sarah listened without interruption, her hands stilling over the cloth. When he finished, she leaned forward. "If they took him, you won't find help from the police. Griffin pays half their salaries." "Then I'll find him myself," Jack replied. "You can't go alone," she said. "They watch everything. There's a man, used to work security for Griffin before he quit. He's got information. Name's Earl Ramsey. Lives near the sawmill, keeps to himself now. If anyone knows where they're keeping Frank, it's him." Jack nodded his thanks, leaving a few bills on the counter. As he turned to leave, Sarah's voice followed him, quiet but urgent. "Be careful, Jack. Griffin doesn't bury enemies in court. He buries them in the ground." The sawmill lay on the outskirts of town, an abandoned complex, swallowed by pine and frost. Jack parked in the shadows and approached on foot. Ranger moved beside him, stepped soundless on the snow. Inside, the faint glow of a lantern flickered through a broken window. Jack knocked once. Silence. Then a voice rasped, "Who's asking?" "Jack Turner," he answered. "Sarah Denton sent me." The door creaked open. A man stood there, rough and solid, his left arm replaced by a steel prosthetic, polished to a dull shine. Earl Ramsey looked like a man who'd made peace with pain, but not with guilt. Years ago, he had been a Marine, then a security officer for Griffin Industries, until an accident at a test site cost him his arm and his conscience. He let Jack inside, shutting the door behind them. "You shouldn't be here," Earl said. "If they catch you, you'll end up like the others." Jack didn't flinch. "They took someone, an old veteran named Franklin Moore. I need to know where." Earl studied him for a long moment. Then he walked to a cluttered table and unrolled a map of the region. "There's a site north of here," he said, tapping a red-marked area near the ridge. "Used to be an old ranger station. Griffin's men use it for storage, or at least that's what they say. But I've heard trucks up there late at night. And once I saw a man matching your friend's description dragged from a van." Jack's jaw tightened. "How many guards?" "4, maybe 5, Earl said. "Armed, mean, and scared of the man they work for. That makes them dangerous." Jack nodded slowly, memorizing the map. As he turned to leave, Earl added quietly, "You've got a look in your eye I used to have. Don't lose it. It's the look of someone who still believes he can fix things." Jack paused at the door. "Can I?" "No," Earl said. "But maybe you can make them pay." Back at the cabin site, The wind had picked up again, sweeping through the broken walls. Jack crouched beside the remnants of the fire pit, staring into the dying embers as Ranger lay close, eyes half open but alert. He thought of Franklin's quiet smile, of the man who'd once fought wars only to be destroyed by his own homeland. Somewhere out there, that same man was sitting in the dark again, waiting for a miracle. Jack had no miracles to give, but he had something close enough. Resolve. He reached for his phone, dialing the one number he hadn't used in years. The call rang twice before a gravelly voice answered, "Turner? Haven't heard that name since Kandahar." Jack smiled faintly. "I need a favor." "You always do," the voice replied. "What's the job?" "Extraction. One man. Possibly more. Hostiles are corporate, not foreign." "Makes no difference," the voice said. "Send coordinates." The call ended. Ranger raised his head, tail twitching once. Jack looked out into the night, the snow swirling in small, relentless flurries. Somewhere far beyond those trees, Franklin Moore was waiting. And somewhere, even closer, men were preparing to make sure Jack Turner never reached him. He stood, holstered his pistol, and whispered, "Tomorrow we bring him home." But as he turned toward the cabin, something caught his eye. A glint of metal buried in the snow near the old fire pit. He knelt and brushed it aside. A bullet casing, fresh, the metal still warm to the touch. Someone had been there, watching. Jack's heart hardened. The hunt had already begun. Dawn crawled over the ridges of northern Arizona, spilling pale light across the frozen pines. The mountains looked calm, but Jack Turner knew better. Silence always came before chaos. He stood beside his truck, studying the folded map Earl Ramsey had given him, the one marked with a red X, where Franklin Moore was supposedly being held. Ranger paced restlessly beside him, tail low, breath misting in the cold. The dog could sense it. The tension before battle, the smell of something about to break. Jack had called in the one man he trusted with his life. When the sound of an approaching vehicle echoed through the valley, he didn't reach for his weapon. He just waited. The black Jeep rolled to a stop beside him, and a man climbed out, moving with the stiff grace of someone who had known pain and learned to ignore it. Ethan Cole, his former SEAL teammate, carried the air of a man who had seen too much and paid too high a price. His right leg was gone below the knee, replaced by a carbon fiber prosthetic he didn't bother to hide. Years ago, Ethan had saved Jack during a mission in Kandahar by stepping on the explosive meant for him. Since then, they had shared more than friendship. They shared a debt neither spoke of. "You look like hell," Ethan said, voice rough but edged with humor. Jack cracked a smile. "You should see the other guy." The two clasped hands briefly, an unspoken exchange of loyalty and pain. "Earl called me," Ethan continued, "said you found something worth bleeding for again." "Franklin Moore," Jack replied. "They took him. Griffin's men." Ethan nodded, eyes hardening. "Then let's get him back." They spread the map across the hood of the truck. "Old Ranger Station here," Jack said, tapping the red mark. "Ramsey says it's being used as a holding site. 5 guards, maybe more. No cameras, no official access road." Ethan leaned closer. "We hit fast, quiet, and before sunrise. Any idea what Griffin's keeping him for?" Jack hesitated. "Whatever Frank knows, it's worth killing for." The plan came together in silence. Jack would infiltrate from the west ridge, while Ethan covered the south approach with a long-range rifle. Ranger would stay close to Jack, tracking scent and detecting movement. It wasn't the kind of mission they'd planned in years, but the rhythm came back easily, like muscle memory carved by trauma. They drove north until the forest grew thick and the road turned to ice. The ranger station sat on a plateau above a narrow gorge surrounded by pine and mist. Through binoculars, Jack spotted a pair of men smoking outside the main cabin, rifles slung loosely on their shoulders. One leaned against a truck with the Griffin Industries logo half scratched off. The arrogance of men who thought they were untouchable. Ethan's voice came through the earpiece. 2 guards at the door, 1 on the tower. You're clear on the flank. Jack exhaled, lowering himself. Into the snow. Ranger crept beside him, silent as shadow. They moved through the trees, every crunch of snow timed with the wind's breath. The closer they got, the more Jack's pulse steadied. This was where he felt alive, where everything made sense again. Pain, fear, guilt. They all disappeared when the mission began. At 20 yards, he signaled Ranger forward. The dog darted low, circling behind the cabin. One guard turned, frowning. Jack moved before thought. 2 steps, 1 strike. The man fell without a sound. The second barely had time to register movement before the butt of Jack's rifle hit his jaw. Both bodies dropped into the snow. Inside, a voice called out, "You 2 done freezing your asses off?" Another man appeared in the doorway, but the barrel of Ethan's rifle flashed once from the ridge. The man fell backward, dead, before he hit the ground. Jack and Ranger slipped inside. The smell of gasoline and damp wood filled the air. The interior was dim, lit by a single bulb swinging from a wire. Footsteps echoed from deeper in the hall. Ranger's head lifted. He caught the scent. They turned a corner and found a small storage room with a padlocked door. From behind it came a faint, ragged cough. "Frank," Jack whispered. He drove his shoulder into the door. The wood splintered, and the old man tumbled forward, blinking against the light. "You shouldn't have come," Franklin rasped, his voice thin but steady. "They'll be back." Jack crouched, cutting the ropes at his wrists. "We're leaving, now." Franklin's hands trembled, but his eyes, those weary, haunted eyes, still carried fire. "There's more, Jack. Files. Proof they burned my house to cover a chemical leak. They killed my son for speaking out. It's all in Griffin's private vault downtown." Jack felt the old rage rise, slow and hot. "Then we end this," he said. The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the moment. The window exploded above them, spraying glass. Ethan's voice came through the earpiece, urgent, strained. 2 trucks inbound from the South Road, reinforcements." Jack hauled Franklin to his feet. "Move!" They sprinted toward the back exit as bullets tore through the walls. Ranger darted ahead, barking once, a warning. Jack shoved the old man through the open door just as the gas barrels near the entrance ignited. The blast threw them into the snow, the shock wave rolling across the valley like thunder. For a few seconds, all Jack could hear was the ringing in his ears. Then Ranger was there, pressing close, whimpering low but unhurt. Smoke curled into the sky as the cabin burned. Ethan's voice crackled again, broken by static. "I've got movement. 3, maybe 4 left. Headed your way." Jack pulled Franklin to cover behind a fallen tree. "You can still walk?" "Barely," Frank muttered, "but I'll make it." "Good," Jack said, "because we're not done yet." Ethan's rifle cracked. Once, then twice. 2 figures fell in the snow. The third kept coming. Jack saw the flash of a pistol, raised his own, and fired. Silence returned just as quickly as it had been broken. Only the wind remained, carrying the smoke toward the rising sun. By the time they reached the truck, Franklin was shivering, but alive. Ethan limped down from the ridge, rifle slung across his back, breath visible in the morning chill. "You got him," he said, nodding to Frank. "Good." Jack handed him a folded piece of paper, coordinates, and a name scribbled in ink. "Griffin's vault," Jack said. "That's where we go next." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You sure you're ready to take on a corporation, Jack?" "They made it personal," Jack replied. He looked at Franklin, then at Ranger, who was staring into the forest, ears pricked. "And I'm done losing people?" The old man looked down, voice trembling. "There's something else you need to know about Griffin, about the night my house burned." Jack turned to him, but before Frank could speak, the sound of a helicopter echoed in the distance, growing louder. Ethan's eyes widened. "They're faster than we thought." Jack gripped his weapon, gaze fixed on the horizon where a black helicopter crested over the trees. "Then we finish this," he said, voice cold and certain. One way or another, snow whipped across the ridges as dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of the ranger station. The helicopter that had chased them through the night now lay twisted in a clearing below, its black tail half buried in ice. The storm had done what bullets couldn't. It grounded the enemy, bought Jack Turner a few more precious hours. But he knew it wasn't over. Not yet. The wind howled through the trees like ghosts mourning the fallen. Ethan Cole stood beside him, reloading with the calm precision of an old soldier who'd accepted that survival was never a guarantee. Franklin Moore sat near the truck, wrapped in a blanket, trembling, but alert. Ranger patrolled the perimeter, head low, body rigid. The dog hadn't rested since the explosion. "We can't run forever," Ethan said quietly, breaking the silence. "Griffin's people will regroup. When they do, they'll bring everything." Jack nodded. His eyes were locked on the distant skyline where the city of Flagstaff shimmered faintly under the pale sun. "Then we take the fight to them." Franklin lifted his head, his voice hoarse but steady. "There's a vault. Griffin keeps his real files there. Proof of the chemical spills, the bribes, the fires. He's untouchable without it." "Where?" Jack asked. "Downtown," Franklin replied. "The Griffin Tower, top floor. He built his empire right over the graves he made." The plan was simple, but suicidal. Jack had been on enough missions to know the difference. But it didn't matter. This wasn't about orders or medals anymore. It was about a promise made in the snow to a man the world had forgotten. Ethan looked at him, reading his thoughts. "One last ride?" he said. Jack smirked faintly. "One last ride." They drove into Flagstaff by nightfall. The city, quiet and cold, glowed with the artificial light of power, the kind built on silence and money. Griffin Tower loomed above it all, a monolith of steel and tinted glass. Jack parked a few blocks away. "We go in quiet," he said. "Grab the files, expose them, and get out." Ethan loaded his rifle. "Quiet's overrated." Franklin stayed in the truck, clutching the thermos Jack had given him earlier. "I'll be here when you get back," he said. "You sure?" Jack asked. "I've run long enough," the old man replied. Inside, the building was a tomb of luxury. Marble floors, gold accents, security guards whose eyes were trained not to see too much. Jack and Ethan moved like shadows, taking the back stairwell up 20 flights. On the top floor, the air smelled of money and arrogance. A single light burned in the corner office. Through the glass wall, Gordon Griffin stood behind a desk, speaking into his phone. He was in his 50s, sharp-featured and smooth-spoken, the kind of man who never got his hands dirty, but his eyes betrayed something else. Fear disguised as control. Jack stepped inside, weapon raised. "We need to talk." Griffin froze, then smiled thinly. "You're the soldier," he said, "the one causing all this trouble." "You killed people," Jack said evenly. "You burned homes. You left families to rot so your company could bury its waste." Griffin's smile faltered. "Idealists like you never learn. The world runs on power, not conscience. You should know that." Ethan entered behind Jack, covering the door. "Funny," he said. "We used to think the same thing about war, until we saw what it really costs." Griffin gestured toward the window. "If you pull that trigger, you'll vanish before sunrise. There's no record of you, no name. You're nothing." Jack lowered the pistol slightly, not because he hesitated, but because he saw something else. A flash drive on the desk, half hidden under a folder. "That's it, isn't it?" Griffin's composure cracked. "You have no idea what you're doing," he hissed. "Those files could destroy more than me." "Then let them," Jack said. He grabbed the drive, shoving it into his jacket. Griffin lunged for the hidden gun beneath his papers, but before he could aim, Ranger burst through the door with a snarl that froze the room. The shot fired wide, shattering the glass wall. Griffin stumbled backward, eyes wide with disbelief, as Jack's fist met his jaw. The man fell hard, the city lights reflected in his broken glasses. "You built your tower on graves," Jack said quietly. "Time you joined them." Sirens echoed from below. Security was closing in. "We've got company," Ethan warned. Jack glanced at the window, 20 stories up, wind howling through the shattered glass. "You still trust me?" "Always," Ethan said. They clipped their harnesses to the emergency cables running down the side of the building. Ranger barked once, ready. The three of them pelled into the freezing air as guards stormed the floor above. They hit the ground running, vanishing into the maze of alleyways. Moments later, an explosion tore through the top of Griffin Tower. Ethan's final contingency, triggered by remote. The tower's glass crown erupted in flame, casting a crimson reflection across the snow. Jack looked back only once. "Justice," he whispered, "for Frank's son, for everyone." By morning, the city was in chaos. News outlets swarmed the streets as the FBI seized Griffin's accounts and arrested his surviving executives. The flash drive's data, emails, financial records, evidence of chemical dumping, was already public. Franklin watched it unfold from the back of a hospital van, tears cutting through the soot on his face. "You did it," he murmured when Jack approached. "No," Jack said softly. "We did." Ethan sat nearby, his prosthetic leg resting on a crate, exhaustion written across his face. "You ever think we'll stop fighting?" he asked. Jack looked at Ranger, who was watching the rising sun with calm eyes. "Maybe not," he said, "but at least now we're fighting for something that matters." Days later, the snow began to melt. Franklin's rebuilt cabin stood by Lake Mary, smoke curling gently from the chimney. Ranger dozed on the porch while Jack fixed a loose shingle, his wounded arm finally healing. Ethan, leaning on his crutch, handed him a cup of coffee. "You know," he said, "for once this feels like peace." Jack smiled faintly. "Peace doesn't last, but it's enough." As they sat in the quiet morning, a mail truck pulled up the road. The driver, a young woman with a kind smile, stepped out carrying an envelope. "From Washington," she said. Jack tore it open. Inside were 2 medals, one for valor, one for service, and a letter from the Department of Defense acknowledging their actions as off-duty intervention in the preservation of civilian life. Ethan laughed. Guess we're heroes again. Jack folded the letter carefully. No, he said, just men who didn't look away. The camera of dawn lingered on the cabin, the lake glinting like glass, and Ranger's steady gaze on the horizon, as if guarding something sacred. The war was over, at least for now, but deep inside Jack's heart, he knew the world would always need men like them, those who fought not for medals or orders, but for the quiet promise that justice, once found, must never fade. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder or lightning. They come quietly, through the hands of broken men who refuse to stay down, through the loyalty of a dog that never leaves, through the courage of those who still believe in doing what's right, even when no one is watching. Jack, Ethan, and Franklin were not saints. They were scarred, tired, and human. Yet in their struggle, we see the fingerprints of God, the reminder that light can bloom even from the ashes of corruption and pain. Perhaps you, too, have stood at the edge of despair. Maybe you've lost something or someone or faced battles that no one else saw. Remember this: when you hold on to faith, when you act with love and integrity, heaven takes notice. Every small act of kindness, every moment you choose good over easy, that is God's quiet miracle working through you. If this story touched your heart, share it. Leave a comment about what miracle you're still waiting for. Subscribe to our channel so together we can spread hope, faith, and courage through every story. And as we end this journey tonight, may the Lord bless and protect you. May His light guide you through every storm, and may you never forget, even in silence, God is still writing your story.